Hey everyone, welcome to Table and Craft. Today we're going to be doing some more scatter terrain because I still need it. There's just so much scatter terrain out there that is so helpful and useful. So we're going to be building some more of that today, but we're also going to be testing a theory. And that theory is, are certain pieces of terrain worth crafting by hand over 3D printing them? I recently got a 3D printer, and I know what you're thinking, and before you say it, this isn't going to be something that's going to give me an excuse to stop crafting things by hand. I got it as a tool for my crafting toolkit to enable myself in ways that weren't possible, or making myself even more efficient. The terrain pieces in question are doors. Now, I've made many doors so far on previous crafts. You'll see the doors that I made on the really large Tudor style house that I made. It's my very first videos that I put out. I guess without further ado, here are the two doors that I made / printed. So here's the door that I made by hand. It looks a lot like my other doors, but I kind of modeled it after the one that I printed out, which is this one. And as you can see, I mean, they kind of both have stone archway around them. They have round handles. So let's go and see how I made this and see how practical it is to make these by hand. Spoiler alert for the end of the video, I think they're incredibly practical to make, especially since, getting into 3D printing can, one, be kind of pricey, not as pricey as you might think though, and two, very intimidating. I was super intimidated by it, but I just kind of did it because I thought it would be fun, and I've really enjoyed it so far. So here's the 3D door I printed. It's printed in gray. It wasn't perfect. One of the handles on one side is kind of half not there, but it's a good little door and it looks good. I like it. And here are the parts that we're going to use to make our own version of this door. I wanted to make this a bit different than previous doors that I made, which I made entirely out of foam, because I found out my doors were pretty thick and they didn't need to be as thick as they were. Because anytime I wanted to build maybe a stone archway around them or a wood casing, the door would get even wider because I wanted that to actually stick out farther than the door. So using chipboard was kind of the answer. Now you could trace the door if you want on a piece if you already have one, but I actually already have a template from the previous doors that I did, and I opted to use that instead of just outright, using the 3D printed door as a stencil. So I got that stencil traced onto another piece of chipboard, and then I cut it out to get ready to start putting kind of the stone archway or door casing around the edges. And I did this in a kind of a strange way. Maybe not so strange, but it wasn't the way I thought I was going to be doing it. But I took individual bricks and I cut partially into them two close together cuts, and then kind of scored out the piece of foam with this clay sculpting tool. And that would serve as a little notch that would just kind of sit on the chipboard and just kind of hug it and just give the detail on both sides of the door. So once I kind of proved that concept, I went ahead and made a keystone to kind of sit at the top for looks and also structure. And this was kind of in design after the 3D printed model that I had. I wanted to look similar and I wanted to prove that you could make something just like it out of crafting material. So after a quick dry fitting of the pieces to see how they would look, I was all ready to glue them on. And the glue of choice for this was something that would dry quickly and be very secure, and that was hot glue. I first wanted to get the keystones centered and in place and then just work off from there. So once that was glued on, it was just a matter of adding each individual brick on the sides, and we had a nice result. I kind of feel like every time I talk about hot glue, I've got some new tip with it, but honestly, hot glue is a wonderful material to use, but when using it, definitely keep your eye out for squeeze out. You'll see sometimes that you'll get some glue sticking out from behind the piece you're gluing on, and that can come up and be kind of a problem later on. It's not a big problem, it's just much easier to remove while it's hot as opposed to once it's dried, because then you'll have to cut it out as opposed to just wipe it out with like a toothpick, or I like to use the pokey end of my clay sculpting tool. It was then time to start texturing all the wood planks that were going to be on the door, and I went to the wire brush. This is a fast and effective way to create really good wood texture. Um, I personally like this a bit more than just hand doing the texture. Yeah, you don't get like individual curls and knots and whatever, but there are techniques like the one you're seeing now where you can create knots by just placing your finger on one side, flipping it around, and then placing your finger on the same spot on the opposite side and create a nice looking knot. You don't have to drag the wires across your finger, but just to the side of it. And as you can see here, you get a nice little kind of knot there, which you can fill in later by hand with a bit more lines. I took the same door template that I used to make the shape of my door to kind of get the shape of the planks to fit in between the stones that I had glued to the actual door piece. This was a quick and easy way to kind of get them in there to get ready for a dry fit. I highly recommend you always try and do a dry fit first because you don't want to go and start gluing something and then have it not work. I cut these planks knowing that they probably weren't going to be the exact right size. I didn't do a pre-measurement, which is also another thing you could do to make things a bit easier on yourself, but I didn't do that. So I started dry fitting them and then I realized that they were too wide and I had to trim them their widths all individually, which was fine. It took no time at all, but yeah, always dry fit before you glue because glue is permanent most of the time once it dries. I then put a nice healthy application of tacky glue on the door and put the planks in place. And they were G2G, my friends, and it was starting to look good. Yeah, I really like the way this door turned out. I mean, it's just as cute as all the other ones I've made. For the hinges, I used yet another template that I used on previous doors, and this time I cut them out of cardstock paper. I didn't want them to be as thick as the previous ones I did, and they were kind of annoying to cut, even with a hot wire, because it's so small and you're working such thin material that it's kind of a pain. So I traced two on there, I folded the paper over, and used the glue stick to attach them to each other before I cut out the individual hinges. And they looked great. I'm glad I used different colors in this video because now you can actually see all the individual pieces. One thing I didn't actually film was I put a little trim piece on the inside of the bricks over the wood, kind of like a metal piece, which you'll see better later. I gave it a little bit of texture, or a lot of bit of texture, with tinfoil. Such an easy, cheap, efficient way. Man, this stuff is great. I use other tools to add texture sometimes, but this one just really works super well. I created a base for it to kind of to be a freestanding door, gave it some texture as well, and then it was about ready for the doorknob. And I made a little plate just out of foam and glued it on, and then I had made a bunch of handles and the last time I made doors and just used those for this project as well. I attached the base, and after getting that all glued on, you could see the comparison. My doors looked very similar as far as overall design components, and they both look great. But now it's time to actually make them kind of look the same with the paint job. And full disclosure here, I've never really painted any kind of miniature or I guess 3D printed anything. I don't have any fancy paints for them. I don't have any fancy brushes for them. I just started painting them with the paints that I already have that you've seen in previous videos. If you haven't seen those previous videos, go check them out. But the result is actually fine. I thought it turned out to look really well, but again, I didn't have any of the fancy stuff, or I guess mini specific paints for painting on plastic. I painted these two minis previously with just spray paint and a dry brushing. Nothing fancy, just a nice monochromatic paint to bring out the details. The painting was pretty straightforward and in line with a lot of the other paintings I've done. I used a nice poopy brown color for the wood, kind of a medium gray for the stone, picked out some random stones, made them a little bit lighter. I used a silver for any of the metal parts. This would get a wash over it later to hopefully darken it up, which it did. And everything was looking good. And the final result of these doors, after getting them washed, I was very pleased with. One more so than the other, but we can talk about that after this sexy video montage. So enjoy these photos, and I'll see you on the other side. So we've got the two doors here. Now, as you can see, one of them has a lot more detail than the other, and it's this one, the 3D printed one. It has a lot more detail in the hinge. The hinges are much more complicated. They actually have a hinge pin. They have these extra, like, kind of decorative, I guess, bolts that go through the planks of the door. And comparatively to the one that I made by hand, I just poked holes into the paper and foam to indicate bolts, which is totally fine. Now, I could easily go and make this door and make it a lot more detailed than the 3D printed door, but it takes a lot of time. Now, this door is perfectly adequate for scatter terrain, and I really like it. In fact, in some of the pictures that you saw, it actually probably looks better with some of the previous terrain that I've made in last week's video in those kind of brick stone pillars. And it makes sense that it would, because it's made from the same material. This door, however, it just has so much more to it. There's more detail for the wash to pick up, which gives it almost makes it look like it has more contrast. It definitely makes it look like it has more detail, because it does have more detail. Now, this I just downloaded in the file size that it came as, and it's pretty small. And if you compare it to, a mini, it's like the same size as the door. So, we don't make doors that size. This one is, I think, a much more appropriate size. So if I were to reprint this, I would be printing it a little bit bigger. But between these two doors, I like them both. But what I'll probably end up doing is actually printing more, because, again, these are going to be scatter terrain. I'm always trying to find ways to work more efficiently, because crafting things takes time. This door took quite a while. And now that I've done it once, I could do it faster the next time. I could easily just, get an assembly line together and then, then paint them all at once too. But I think it'd just be easier to print out these. I could print out probably like 6 of these at once on my printer, and then I'll have 6 doors ready to paint in a matter of hours, all while I've been building maybe some more dungeon tile sets, or maybe a tavern, or maybe something else a bit interesting, or something that I'm getting ready for next week's play session. Yeah, I think moving forward, I will probably be printing scatter terrain doors, but I probably will be hand making any other doors for specific projects, or maybe boss doors I'll probably craft, because boss doors are always fun, and they kind of are intimidating, and it gets players anxious and nervous and excited. So yeah, crafting a big boss door might be the way to go. So yeah, I think in the future, for scatter terrain pieces that don't really need to have a lot of time and effort put into them, I will probably be printing them with my 3D printer. On the other hand, crafting them from scratch is definitely a possibility, and you do not need a nice fancy 3D printer to do it. It'll take you a little bit longer, but you can have really great results. So that's it for this week's video. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to all those who have liked and subscribed, and especially commented. Please comment down below your thoughts on, crafting things from hand or printing them. Or maybe let me know of things that you don't think are worth crafting but are definitely worth printing instead, and vice versa. Go ahead and follow me over on Instagram. I'll put it right here. And I'm on there all the time, posting pictures of what I'm doing. Sometimes I will actually post teasers to the next video I'm going to be doing. So that's it. Take care of yourself, and we'll see you in the next video.